This one's a little bit eclectic, but it's kind of cool. Brian Yoder has a question. And it was a 3-paragraph question. I just took the first one, Brian. Sorry about that. It basically said, Bill, given your interpretation of the double slit experiment, let me just stop right there. There's an experiment done where they pass a beam of light through a slit and then another slit, and the beams of light, the actual light, behaves differently whether or not somebody's watching. I know that sounds absolutely batty, barmy, mad, but it's true. I think I have this right. It's either this or the reverse. I don't actually remember, but I'm pretty sure that if there's nobody there and the light passes through the slit, it behaves like a wave, but if somebody starts observing it, it behaves like a particle. It changes its nature based on whether or not somebody's watching it. That's apparently true. It really is. This was a huge, huge wake-up call for me. So, given your interpretation of the double slit experiment as demonstrating that consciousness can have an effect on matter, have you ever wondered why or if someone has tried to see what kind of consciousness would cause the effect? For example, would a baby be enough? What about a frog or an amoeba? What about a sleeping person or a corpse, a video camera, a stone? It's a profoundly good question. At what level does observation, because it appears to be the act of observation that does it, that changes reality. And I don't mean like you get in there with an electron microscope and in order to see something you bombard it with neutrons. I'm saying you just look at it and the result changes. The effect appears to have, this is even more mind-blowing, honestly. It appears to happen if there's a camera set up. In other words, if you, I don't know how they determine how it's behaving if no one's observing it, but there is some way that they do it. It's probably something where they're getting some kind of result, and then they turn on a camera and nothing else changes, and it changes not just its volume. It doesn't change just quantitatively. It changes qualitatively. It becomes something else when somebody's watching it. And my understanding is, I may be incorrect about this, but I suspect not. My understanding is that just the act of turning on a video camera has this effect. So clearly, you've got a really good point here. I had assumed that it was the intelligence that was somehow influencing it through ways that are very, very difficult to explain right now. But it turns out that it may be, again, this world is it's not only stranger than we imagine, it's stranger than we can imagine. It's possible that the television camera recorded things as waves until somebody looked at the video, at which point the recording changed to show particles. That's no more unbelievable than anything else. If it turns out that cause and effect are in place the way they appear to be in place, and cause and effect is an illusion too, cause and effect, this cause, that is just simple motion through a fourth dimension that we can't see. But if it turns out that a video camera does it, then there is something about the act of observing. And when you talk about taking it down, Brian, to an amoeba or a frog or something, I think this is called the anthropic principle. There's a school of thought that says, no, you're absolutely right. When there's nothing but amoebas, the Earth is simple. There's nothing there. As these creatures become more sophisticated, the universe has to become more sophisticated because it's more observed. And all these probability waves, all these quantum states of both or neither, basically get compressed when somebody looks at something. And this theory basically says that when you're, if you got a caveman with a functional IQ of 20 or something, then the stars are in fact little twinkling lights in the sky. When you put a telescope on them, they have to become more complex because they're being observed at a higher level. And the more delicate our instrumentation is, the deeper we're able to look and the more complex the universe has to be. It becomes complex as a result of the observation. Now, that doesn't make a lick of sense to us in our little world, but there's a lot of things that don't make a lick of sense in our world, and things like, time slowing down when you approach the speed of light, and spaceships compressing as you approach the speed of light, all the rest of it. But one thing that it does lead me to think about, and I like to follow this chain of thought, and that is this. It might be better to think of things in completely opposite directions of the way that we think of them. In other words, we think that the universe exists so that consciousness can be created through evolutionary processes and so on. But it's possible that consciousness exists and consciousness creates the matter by organizing information. So instead of the universe being made out of mass and energy, there's a possibility that the universe is made out of information. Now, some people say we're a giant simulation. It seems unlikely to me, but then again, what does that mean? If somebody wound this thing up and started it, okay, that's fine. But I become more and more convinced that the structure of the universe is information. And the more complex that information gets, the more complex the universe becomes as a result of the observation. We know that looking at something changes the outcome, and the more looking we do, which is in a more complex way, the more the outcome should be changed, and the more the resolution should get finer and finer and finer as we get better and better instrumentation. The universe will have to resolve itself down into ever finer little pieces, ever more complex pieces, and so on. Now, some people think this is all just nonsense. And it certainly sounds like nonsense, but if you pass a beam of light through two slits, they behave like waves if no one's looking, and they behave like particles if they are. So there's experimental evidence for you. And experimental evidence is the gold standard of people who live in the real world and try to look at life rationally.